Thank you. I hope we are all okay now. I mean, not that we were okay before, but I mean, now I am okay. You know, I was just telling Prof that I mispronounced his name because I felt I was hungry. So it's good that I ate. I'm sure this time around I'm not going to spoil anybody's name. Anyways, now, I mean, we are going into our various panel session. We are going to digest the reason why we are here. We've heard the various keynote, but what exactly is the discussion around, right? So we are going to delve into discussion. Remember, this is a 2-day conference. Today's session is just one of the many that they are going to listen to tomorrow as well. So I would do well to call on to the various panel sessions. When I read out your profile, you kindly take the stage and we will take it from there. We do the first panel discussion and we take in questions and all that. I mean, on the last day tomorrow, we will try and put some action points there and ask Spin to work on it for us so that next year when we have DRIF, it's just not talks, but action. Now, to moderate the session on enforcing policies and regulations to support digital rights of the marginalized is Dr. Mrs. Millicent. Yes, I've already given her profile out, so she's our moderator for session. Oh, let's clap for her. Yes. Yeah. Now, for our first speaker, we have in the person of Dr. Mrs. Elizabeth L. Bizotovi. She's the programs manager of the Ghana Blind Union. She holds a PhD in disability studies from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. She holds a master's degree in development communication from the University of Ghana, Legon. She has over 17 years of development work experience in the non-governmental sector. She partners with local and international non-governmental organizations and civil society organizations in the implementation of programs and policies that ensure the total inclusion of persons with disability in all facets of life. Her work experience extends across advocacy and provision of expert advice on building inclusive system for service delivery in the area of health, education, and employment. She plays a key role in the development of National Inclusive Education Policy of Ghana. She currently serves as a member of the International Technical Committee on Inclusive Education. Dr. Elizabeth is passionate about access to quality education for persons with disability and how access to ICT for persons with disability could improve their participation in society. She is a feminist, a mentor, and an author. Let's welcome Dr. Mrs. Elizabeth Zotovi. Our second speaker is Dr. Vincent Ajali Mensah. Dr. Vincent is a security education expert, a development researcher, and consultant. He's a senior lecturer at the University of Education, Winneba. He has experience and expertise in security, human rights, organizational governance, leadership, and strategic development or strategy development. He's a visiting lecturer in a number of high-profile institutions of higher learning, including the National Police Academy, where he taught security and human rights. He holds a PhD from the University of Sussex, UK. He provides consultancy services for the Ghana Police Service, MasterCard Foundation, the Economist Intelligence Unit in the UK, UNICEF, IBIS, and British Council, among others. Outside of the academia, he's a human rights activist, including serving as the International Board Chair for Amnesty International. He attended many international meetings, workshops, and academic conferences in more than 30 countries around the world. In fact, my first experience with Dr. Vincent was on Amnesty International GIJ branch, let me say. And of course, he has actually proven who he is. when he takes the stage, he would do that. So, Doc, please, on the stage. Thank you. Our third speaker is in the person of Engineer Frederick Aban. He's the director of the IT Youth Employment Agency. He has experienced network engineer with a demonstrated history of working in various industries. He's skilled in Microsoft technology, data center, software development, project management, machine learning, data analytics, and network design. He has a strong research profession within a master's degree focused in computer engineering. Without much ado, we welcome. Now, our final speaker is Mrs. Sefako Ajaben. Mrs. Sefako Ajaben is an astute banker with 10 years working experience in relationship banking. She's also a serial entrepreneur with her latest creation being Kalami, a nutritionally well-packaged fried fish. Oh, Kalami. Okay. I mean, it's pronounced Kalami. I'm trying to make it sound British, but I'm a Ghanaian, so it's Kalami. Yeah, thank you. Being a passionate mother of two strong boys, Sefako and her husband have set up the Elori Foundation, named after their first son, who is a special need child. The foundation advocates for church syndrome, hard of hearing, and special need children. Sefako believes that differently able persons are also part of God's children. Hence, her mission in life is to advocate for the love and dignity that they deserve. So this is our strong panel. I mean, from their profile, you can see that they are experts in various discussions, and they are going to be talking about enforcing policies and regulations to support digital rights of the marginalized ones. So I'm handing over the microphone to Dr. Millicent to moderate this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and a warm welcome to my very distinguished panelists. So we have a very important discussion here. We are looking at the policy enforcement. We know policies are drafted and some are never implemented. And when it comes to issue of digital rights, there is a school of thought that some of these policies no longer valid because issues of digitalization was not considered and we are in a different era altogether. And perhaps is the reason why some people are still lagging behind. So there is the need to digest and then understand some of the issues so that we can forge ahead and know how to include each and every one. As we all know that the emergence of COVID-19 necessitated an upsurge in digital transformation and also resulted in significant long-term technological infrastructure change. I say long-term because buying online and working from home, some of these things are never going to cease. We're going to live with them for a very long time. And so whilst all of that is going on, we want to see how everyone can be included in the digitalization agenda, especially from the policy perspective. So welcome once again, and we're going to dive into the issues. So first of all, I would like to find out, of course, I'm sure we're gonna move in a very particular order like this, if you don't mind. It's just at random. All right. So I want to know where we are in our context here in Ghana. Do we have policies or say regulations that are in place to tackle issues of digital rights of marginalized group? Why marginalized group? Because we have to place special emphasis on them as far as trying to bridge the disparity is very much important. So, Doug, would you like to share with us?
Okay, so good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. I may say that in Ghana, we have policies. We have policies in general that are meant to promote ICT and digitalized society. But we don't have specific policies targeted at marginalized groups. And we will not, as an advocate for inclusive society, we will not advocate for a policy that is segregated maybe for a marginalized group. But what we are saying is that there are policies, but as to whether the policies are framed to meet the diverse needs of everyone in society, that one I'll say no. For example, we have the ICT for Accelerated Development Policy 2003, which focus is to transform the society and economy through technology-driven activities. We have focus areas like promoting education through ICT. We have maybe building human resource capacity, and a whole lot of activities and programs embedded in that policy. We also have specific indicators for women and girls, including, increasing access to ICT for women and girls. But if you ask me whether we have specific focus on persons with disability, I'll say no. Most of the times when policies are being drafted, we look at everybody in the society as responding to one direction and one focus. We are not mindful of the fact that we have different sets of the population that may access services not necessarily in the same way. So for me, I may say we have policies, but as to whether the policies are drafted to respond to the specific needs of vulnerable groups like persons with disability, no. We even have few instances when you look at the National Authority Commission, National Authority Act, we have a section that encourage the service providers to respond to the needs of persons with disabilities. But again, when you look at that, it's vague. When you talk of persons with disabilities, we have diverse needs and different groups. So if you say you are responding to the needs of persons with disability, again, you have to look at how the different disability groups will access services. We also have the interoperability framework that is basically promoting maybe the interaction between government and employees, businesses, and the Thai community. And again, when you ask whether persons with disabilities are factored into that policy, I will say no, because their needs are not properly targeted. And for that matter, they are not part. When you, in your introduction, you made mention of e-learning. We all know what happened in 2020 when universities have to break, schools have to break, and they go online. Somebody will ask what happens to persons with disability. I will talk much about visually impaired persons because that is where I work. There was a time the government was trying to do some radio programs, and then it's like, even the people, the presenters, they are not properly sensitized. So the presentation in itself is not targeting the needs of the different disability groups. At a point when we draw their attention, you see that they have somebody in the corner trying to do sign language, which for us doesn't even capture the content of what is being presented. So policies are there, But as to whether the framework itself is inclusive of the needs of the diverse disability groups or the vulnerable groups, that one is another issue we can talk about. Even when the needs are even factored into the policies, the implementation process is also a challenge. So going forward, that is how we have to look at it. We are not looking at segregated policies. We are looking at inclusive policies, but we are looking at that kind of universal design that will address the needs of the specific persons in society. Thank you.
Okay. So the answer to the question is a yes and a no, as has been said. I mean, if you look at the digital space, it's just like the physical space that we have. And the challenges we have in the physical space are the same challenges that have been transported to the digital space. The ways in which in the physical space we have vulnerabilities that are not properly addressed is the same ways in which in the digital space you have limitations to addressing the vulnerabilities that exist over there. So yes, somebody will refer to the Cyber Security Act, somebody will refer to the Data Protection Act, will refer, you've mentioned the ICT for Development Policy, and many others as policies that exist. But as to whether they are inclusive or not is where the question is. I think I just want to say something about a point doctor made about when universities move to whether e-learning or online learning or whatever. I'm a lecturer, so I can say that in that space, we were asked to go to use Telegram and WhatsApp. And the first question I asked was, I had 5 visually impaired students in my class that time. So I called the class reps and I said, where are they? How will they even know that we have gone digital? Do they have WhatsApp? Do they use it? How will they even get this information? That was my first question. And the class reps called them up, and some said they don't even have an Android phone. So that's the point. That's the beginning point. So you see that at that point in time, the university will comfortably say, oh, we've moved online. But we've moved online means that we are completely excluding some groups. Aside from people who are challenged physically and other things, there are people who were also geographically challenged because the digital divide in the country, the coverage, the scope of coverage in terms of the rurality that we have in society is such that many people, where they were, they have no internet access. And so how do they get included in such learning? So the answer is yes and no. On paper, yes, we have policies, but in practice, these policies themselves are discriminatory. And that is where the discussion has to start from.
Simple question, yet a serious question. I would agree with what the 2 earlier speakers have said. There are regulations and policies in Ghana that consider persons with disabilities. However, they don't stand on their own. They are integrated in existing laws. Just shortly before I was invited for this program, I think some days before, I was working on a document and I chanced on something which I had never known. There is a law in Ghana called the Borrower and Lenders Act. I don't know how many of you know it. And we were doing something, so we had to research and read. Then I came across one line that amazed me. And that line was, or it goes something like this, that you cannot discriminate a borrower or somebody who wants to borrow money from a bank just because the person is a PWD. I didn't know that. But the question is, does it happen? There was another line, you cannot discriminate a person from borrowing because the person cannot pay. There are laws in Ghana that we have no idea of. And that is one of the beginning of the problems. We don't even know these regulations do exist. And the two earlier speakers, one of them spoke about the Cybersecurity Act. Someone spoke about the NITA Act. We have the Electronic Communication Act, and so on. There are lots of them. In all of these policy documents, there are clauses in there that favor people or persons with disability. However, many times we don't even know they exist. And because there are a lot of them and we've not put them all under one document, we don't know. Like I said, I never knew that somebody who wants to borrow money who cannot pay should not be discriminated against. If you want to check it, it's I think it's Act 1052. Lender and Borrowers Act, Act 1052. The old one was 772. So you can check it and then you can study it. So these laws are there. However, like the earlier speakers have said, it's a huge document with one line or two lines for persons with disability. And because we don't know all of them, they can't take advantage of them. I think the time has come when we who are challenging this cause have to catalog all of these things. And if you can catalog them and present them as one document, so that you know that for this is the law that favors you. For this is what the law says. Then we can start taking, we can start from there. In addition, maybe the time has come when we need to take advantage of something that is happening right now. The government of Ghana, through SIGA, SIGA is one of the state arms, forgetting the full name, something governance agency, state interest governance agency, something like that, SIGA. Now, SIGA has written to all MMDAs to develop IT policy manuals, compulsory, all MMDAs to develop IT policy manuals. This is compulsory. Now, we've started developing. However, how many agencies of state are going to consider persons with disability in these IT policy manuals? That is because nobody is actually talking to them. Like someone said earlier on that they have, one person said that there's a child with disability and they didn't know certain things. The matter of fact is, many times we don't even know that these laws are there or these laws are being written. And so we don't partake in it. And something else will be written for persons with disability. I have a little girl who cannot hear, she signs. And she's doing so amazing. And so when we are writing some of these laws, we have to consider where I work, we have persons with disability, and we bring them on board so that we can also hear from them. We can take their input. Initially, we were sending laptops to every district office, every regional office, computers to them. And then they told us that, look, the time we also get us those that we can use ourselves. We were not considering that in the beginning because when we are developing systems, like someone said much earlier in the program, we don't consider persons with disability. But the time has come and we have them. Our biggest challenge is, what is the definition of PWD? That's one of the challenges that we have because we can identify a few, the ones we know, maybe visually impaired, maybe they cannot hear, maybe a few of them, but then maybe the scope is very broad that we need to know. That's what Madam said earlier on. If we can have this clear definition and we can start advocating that the IT policy manuals that the state agencies are developing, we should consider persons with disability using this particular framework. I believe it will be a starting point. And that is what I would say for now.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here to speak on this topic. I mean, we've all heard the lecturers and the doctors in the field speak about it. So I wouldn't speak so much because I think they've said almost everything. I think I would say yes, there are laws. I'll agree, yes and no. There are laws, but the communication is difficult. It's difficult to disseminate all these communication to the various categories of the stakeholders to even get involved with using the ICT and all the digital platform. The communication, there's a big barrier to the communication. So I think that's our biggest problem with the legislation and all that. I would also want to bring our attention to the cost of ICT and all that, the legislation and policies on the cost. I know there is something about reducing the cost or waiving taxes on ICT costs for persons with disabilities. So as we speak today, I'm sure that we'll get to know all these things and then we'll know ways and means of going about it. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that the answers that have come out also pause for other questions, actually. Because when all the panelists were talking, one thing I understood is there are policies. I mean, a point was made that even the persons with disability don't know about the policies. They've not been captured well in the policies. They are not involved in the policies. I always say that one big issue that we have is the fact that we don't have quality data on persons with disability. Because you find out that we are quoting different figures. You read this document, it says 10 million people, or other people will say it's 10%. Another document will say 7%. But it's about time that we have that correct and quality data on persons with disability, where we can have a proper categorization, like it was mentioned by one of the speakers, know the different disabilities so that we can make reasonable accommodation, for their needs. Because when we don't have all of this and we lump everybody together, persons with disability, how are we solving the problem? So I think it's a big challenge. We need quality data on persons with disability. So what do we do, if I may ask? Because that is a starting point. If we have the figures, then we can do the kind of groupings that we talked about. We can know, okay, so and so persons with disability are here, but this is what they need to be able to learn and compete well in the web environment. Then we know how to address those needs. So what's the way forward then?
Okay. I may say that disability in itself is not a priority for the government. Because if we have state institutions mandated for collecting data on everybody, then it should be an ongoing process where you go to the hospital and then there's the data collection captures disability and then the types. You go to maybe the education service, we have data collection system, the elements that they have there, capturing the disability aspects or the disaggregated data on disability. So first of all, I may say that there should be a priority. The government and everybody should see disability as a priority for everybody. Nobody, you see, as it stands now, everybody looks at disability as somebody's responsibility, not my responsibility. And I can tell you, some of those duty bearers, they come to realization And sometimes they recognize the need to accept and then deal with disability issues when maybe their relatives or somebody is hard hit with disability. So disability in itself is not a priority, because if I say, let's look at maybe an institution that will capture disability disaggregated data, that institution alone cannot do it. It should be an ongoing process in everything that we do and every data that we collect. And there should be consultation with the disability organizations. Like I said, we have diverse disability groups. We have diverse needs. As I'm sitting down here, I cannot say I am knowledgeable in all the disability diversities that we have. So there should be that continuous conversation on how we can collect the data, how we can improve it. We should not look at data collection as one aspect. We have to look for money to collect that. Then we pause, we don't have money. It should be factored into our day-to-day data collection process at every point. And when we do that, we will be able to plan for persons with disability. Look, we just wait when it's time for census. Then we say we are collecting data on disability. The officers themselves are not properly trained. They go to the field and they only capture the visible disability, leaving the invisible disability. So in fact, there should be that national dialogue and conversation on how we can capture disability disaggregated data. Thank you.
Okay. I think we'll be making all the points before it gets to you all the time. So maybe we have to start from there sometimes. Okay. So let's face it. Countries such as Ghana have problems with data generally. We never have good data on anything. I mean, everything. So data generation is a problem. Every data we have, I was just doing some work last week, and I said, "Oh, can I get the population, total population for this area?" And someone said, "Oh, yeah, I have the data." So the person sent it to me. I saw the total population, and then the other ones disaggregated. So I decided to add some, deduct some to get the population of youth. And I realized that when I add the total disaggregated data, I will get more than the total. So I didn't know where the problem was. So that's the kind of issue we have with data. So if you talk about data on disability, vulnerabilities in general, as a human rights person, I'm talking more about vulnerabilities rather than segregating just disabilities. There are different levels of vulnerability. So if you want to talk about data, the data is porous. That's one. Two, if we want good data, then it means that some of the organizations that are working with these vulnerable groups may have necessarily to generate your own data to be able to support the advocacy that you seek to do. If you don't do that, then there will be a gap in your own advocacy, because you will not be talking for the people you have to talk for, the ways in which you have to talk for them. The other thing about data concerning vulnerabilities is that, you see, sometimes it even depends on the kind of data that you have. The data that we have, as you indicated, are for specific things. So maybe someone is collecting data on the health status of people who have gone to hospital, so they generate some data. Someone is in education. The EMIS data, I've been looking at it. You are reminding me that there is even disability in it. I mean, if you look at that EMIS data carefully, and you want to look at it in terms of disability, you see that you have a lot of difficulties. Yes, it's very scanty, questions on disability. So there are complexities in terms of data that we don't even have to start. And the other thing I want to say is, if you look at the way the data we are collecting now, we are trying to have a one-stop information on everyone, which is the national identification card thing. If you see the processes we are using to do that itself is exclusionary, and it's frustrating for people who are on the margins of society, the vulnerable. The process completely excludes them or makes it very difficult for them. Because if everybody is waking up at 4 a.m. to go and queue to get a card, when do I wake up? How do I participate in that process if I cannot walk? And if you see where the district offices are, where people have to go and register, and look at where the location of some of the vulnerable people, and access to that center itself is a problem. So from day one, the system that is put in place to capture the data itself is such that it cannot collect correct data that can be meaningful and be useful for any analysis and for any qualitative policy making. So these are the challenges that we need to begin to address. Because if people with disability, the vulnerable, want to participate in that process, another lens I'll use to look at it is it poses even a security risk to them. The process of accessing that poses a security risk to them. And for any human being, when it comes to choosing between my safety and that thing, I will choose my safety, because there's no point in trying to access that and losing the remaining of myself in the process. So these are the issues that we need to begin to unearth, challenge, and then use for advocacy and see how this can be addressed. Anytime that some of these things are being done, we are happy as a nation to create space for the protocol list. Should we also be happy as a nation to create space for the vulnerability list? If we begin to talk like this, then I think we will be on the way to somewhere one day. Thank you very much.
When Doc was talking, he spoke about generating PWDs generating their own data. And I was thinking of the cost implication. Because when they bring a budget now to generate their own data, somebody will say there is no money. And then at the end of the day, they will not be able to generate their own data. We spoke about the Ghana card. Initially, I was thinking that the process would really capture a lot of information for persons with disability. But many a times when you are filling forms and you get a particular point, they will ask you, do you have any disability? Yes, no. When you say yes, that's the end of the story. So they group everybody as one. And it is a challenge until maybe, to what he said, we start gathering our own data. I said our, because I am part. We start gathering our own data. We might not have the accurate data we need to make the decisions that we have to make. Or until certain policies are made that when you are gathering or capturing any data, when it gets to persons with disability, these are the protocols you need to follow. These are the type of questions you need to ask so that you can have detailed information that can address the issues of PWDs. Until we get to that point, we will just be beating around the bush. Something happened, and about a month ago, I just bumped on a mail or a letter on my laptop, which I had written some 3-4 years ago. A man walked into my office and he had a challenge. It was an elderly man. We have a program for elderly persons. And this man came and he could not access his funds, which had been paid to him, monthly allowances. his issue was he had developed leprosy on all 10 fingers. And the GIPS system requires your finger to validate so that you can withdraw your money. So I wrote a letter for him to the specific bank. It was a Friday. He came with his son. Now, the time they came, they couldn't go to the bank. So I told them, Monday morning, go to the bank, and then the bank will address the issue for you that you've got leprosy, you are under our program. For that reason, they should look at other means of releasing your funds to you. The Monday, the son called me that my father died over the weekend. And when I saw the letter which I had written some years back, I remembered the man and I felt sad again. We have to help the family as to how they could go about it. But where am I dragging to? If we had information that leprosy is also a disability, and so the GIPS system, for example, which is a very good payment system, has to look for other means for persons who cannot use their fingers to validate themselves. I think the old man wouldn't have gone through that stress he went through. So these are some of the things we have to look at. The issues are very wide and broad. And that's why I said earlier on that how do we define disability? Until we define it properly and we capture what constitutes disability, people who do not know will just point to maybe three. The ones that are, was it Doc that said the visible ones, or Madam said the visible ones? But the invisible ones, most of the time we don't talk about them. So let us start defining disability very well, and then we will be able to solve this problem.
I also believe very strongly that there's insufficient data on PWDs. It all emanates from the fact that those who are making the laws are not including persons with disabilities. Like the story he gave right now, if there was somebody on the board of the decision making who had a disability or who could relate to anyone who had a disability, they'll probably program the app in such a way that the person can also be able to access whatever information that is for everybody. So I believe that persons with disabilities should be included in decision making, in making apps, in making all these digital platforms, coding. They should include the stakeholders who happen to be persons with disability. That way, we'll be able to solve some of these problems. I also indicated another issue whilst he was speaking. The Ghana card, like this, we can source data of persons with disabilities by educating the people doing the process. If they have education on persons with disability, they'll be able to include them in making the Ghana card. That way, we can get information of the number of people who have disabilities in the country. Then we can be able to work with those figures. We can also have programs like the way we are having like this, a call on all those who have disabilities, blow it up, make it a big program so that they can all come. That way, maybe in reporting, we can say that this number of persons with disability came for the program. By and by, we'll be collecting a lot of data on all persons with disability and the types of disabilities we have, so that we can tailor make all these digital processes to address their various needs. And also, Mom also spoke about the census, the processes which they take through. The people are not educated about persons with disabilities. So yes, there has to be education of all persons concerning persons with disability. Also, we have to look at the birth and death registrations to be able to collect enough data. We have in the hospital throughout children are delivered, and we don't know all the disabilities that they come with. They just register their name and then that's it. Maybe governments can look at a law, a policy that has to do with asking various questions of every child that is born, so that we can capture all the various forms of disability to give us adequate data. And I think I've said the program to bring persons with disabilities together. So I think that's true. Bye-bye.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so from everything that we've said, if I may ask, so what measures then are in place, okay, to promote digital rights for the marginalized? I mean, just like with Vincent says, so rural folks, persons with disability, and so on and so forth. What measures are in place? And what's the role of the regulator? Because policies, who is making the policies? So what's their role in promoting digital rights for the marginalized? Yes, I would like to start with you, Engineer. But
what measures are in place?
yes.
I don't know. I don't know what measures are in place at the moment. And you see, society thinks, and that is very false, what I want to say, but not false what I want to say, but false on the side of society. Society thinks that persons with disability are a problem to society. But that is not it. I was taught by an English teacher who was blind in secondary school. And if I can speak to you for you to understand, the person who taught me didn't have his sight. And he taught me how to speak English, and I can speak. But society doesn't see things that way. And so, I really don't know what measures are currently in place. What I think is, we should start developing the measures. Because I really don't know. If there are any, maybe my seniors here will let me know so I can also learn from it. But that question is a very big one that I do not have an answer. Doc, kindly help us give us.
Okay, I want Madam Sepa, because so everything is not said this time.
So like he's saying, I went round and I didn't get. So what I actually wrote was to suggest, yes, I came up with suggesting, yeah. So we need to have digital access for all persons with disabilities. We have to look at all the areas, the rural areas, all those places. We have to look at them, and we have to. Also, I know government put in place, or is it should put in place schools in all the 10 regions that cater for persons with disabilities. So in these schools, we have to run programs or topics or educational materials that has to do with educating of the persons with disabilities about ICT and all the digital access that we have, including building websites, building everything that has to do with ICT. So educating persons with disabilities will help to promote using of the internet interfaces. Then also access to digital financial service. Now, whether we like it or not, we have moved to the digital era where we have to use the phone or other digital platforms to send or receive monies. So I asked myself, what are the policies that have been put in place to help persons with disability to access, like what he was saying about the man with the leprosy. I mean, there wasn't anything for him, so he couldn't access his money. So we need to push government to put in place policies that could help PWCs to access all these financial services. And also, if they can cut the cost of using the digital financial services, which will promote persons with disabilities to use the digital platform. So let's say the mobile money or the cost of sending money these days. No, it's going to start from 1st May, right? It's what, 1.5 in addition to the cost. If they can waive those charges for persons with disabilities, it will start from we getting the information, or start from knowing who has a disability or the other. If we're able to know that, then we are able to know who to waive charges on. Maybe you are using a phone and you have set your phone or set your digital access to a PWD access, then MTN or Vodafone or any of those financial services can know that this is somebody who has a disability, so we shouldn't charge the person for doing this payment or receiving this money. I think when we go around that route, it will be helpful.
Okay.
When she was talking, something just dropped in my mind. I think to the question you asked me that I didn't have the answer. I think if incentives are given to developers who develop systems for persons with disability, or service providers whose services are disability friendly, we will see a lot of our developers developing systems and technologies that persons with disability can use. But for now, there seem to be no incentives. And so everybody is looking at the bigger markets. But if, and these incentives are not maybe fiscal cash to anybody, but maybe tax waivers and so on for companies that develop systems for persons with disability, or any form of incentive that we can think of, I think we will get a lot of people running into that field, that area, and we should look at it carefully.
Okay. Let's agree that inclusion, getting to the level of inclusion is not an easy path. And that explains why from the beginning I said the challenges we have in the physical space are the same challenges we have transported into the digital space. If you understand it from that framework, then first of all, if we want to look at what is in place to promote their access to the digital space, that would be a limited part of the question, the broader question. Because first, getting access to the space is only one point of entry. When you get to the space, then there's the question of how do you keep safe there? Okay. Then there is the question of how do you cope with the governance structures and systems in that space? Then there is the last one, which is how are you able to even use the platforms that are provided? So at least these four strands are there. In terms of policies, we agree that there are policies. There are, at least if you take the Data Protection Act, if you take the Cyber Security Act, if you take the ICT for development, if everybody is to participate in development, then everyone has to participate and there is opportunity for everyone. If you look at the gender policy and all that. But the question is, what kind of devices are even available and what kind of support is the state providing to ensure that we can have devices that are helpful to the vulnerable population? That is one. We have that entry. If we have the devices, when it comes to safety, we, myself and you, who say we can, let's say we can see, we can hear everything. We know of 1,001 risks that exist in the digital space. So some of us use simple things like, let me put password on my phone, let me do fingerprint and those kind of things. Are they able to do it? That's the issue. And we know people spying on us, people calling people fraudsters and all those guys. How are our vulnerable colleagues able to take care of people like that? And what systems are in place to protect them? These are the big questions. There are some times when myself and you who sometimes have eyes can see that, okay, my internet coverage is off, so I can't have access. I was holding my phone the last time and I realized that the Vodafone was working, the MTN had completely gone. There's not even the signal on the phone. Now, I may just be busy making calls, thinking that it's not going through, when in fact it's a network problem. Okay, not that my phone or that person's phone is unresponsive or something. So there are big problems. Now, if I look at it in terms of surveillance, the way our own government and state institutions see that something is appearing on my or some other things, and I'll begin. How are they able to leave internet footprints that we leave? Some of us are able to go and clear history, basic ones. How are they able to fit into this kind of systems and structures? So there are huge issues when it comes to discussing the digital space and in the context of the vulnerabilities that we are talking about. And when you begin to look at it that way, then the engagement that we are trying to, and the advocacies that we are trying to launch, or which we've been doing, we may have to plan them differently, okay, in order to be able to stand up to the challenge and to draw attention to the right issues. So it's a complicated thing to say there are not measures. There are measures. The problem is how those measures are created in such a way that we can all benefit. If you take data protection, how is their data protected? How will I know that my data is being protected? Even if I am not disabled, take it that I'm not disabled, physically, mentally, but by virtue of my location. I mean, we see how people use data. Sometimes here we are lucky, but you go to even programs like this, and you see people's faces there. Did we ask their permission? And in the digital space, people are using people's faces, activities to advertise all over the place. And the question is, did they ask their permission? Do they calculate the risk to which this is exposing them? So there are more deeper questions that maybe we may need to explore as we go along. Thank you.
Okay. So I will also try to respond to some of the issues. What's the question again? How do we ensure that what are the measures in place to, okay. The measures, I will look at it from the policy perspective and then capacity perspective. We all agree that the policies are there, but what we can do is to review the policies again and look at how we can include the needs of the vulnerable groups. When we put it as a policy, then we will always be mindful of the fact that there are some cross-section of people who may access the digital space, but in a different form. Now, the developers, how many of them are even aware that the policies are even there? Even if they are there, they just look at it as, oh, they put something there just to satisfy somebody somewhere. So we need to build their capacity. There's the need for us to create awareness. And I must commend the organizers of this forum. This is one aspect of creating that awareness. Let's move the conversation out to create that kind of awareness for the policy developer, the policy makers, the developers, and the persons with disabilities themselves. We have other vulnerable groups. Doctor was asking of how are they going to do it? How are they going to do it? The how are they going to do it? If we commit to know how they can do it, we will surely know how they can do it. So this brings us to supporting research. Let's support research. Let's commit to making it work. Let's create the space for them. When we create the space for them, we don't end there. Let's make the effort. Let's build the capacities for both the users and then the developers. Doug was asking of incentives. If you care to know, anyway, the Disability Act is under review, but there's an aspect that talks about providing incentives for people who, engage persons with disability or have something to do with persons with disability. But how many of the private companies or sectors are aware of this? The Ghana Blind Union, on a number of occasions, I'm a partner with these ICT groups. We have Amalitech and Azobi. So one time we were having a conversation and I was like, so are you people aware that what you are doing, you could get some tax relief or something if you contact the government, there's something. They are not even aware. So that kind of awareness is very, very necessary for us. And together we can do it. The cost of accessing the space is another factor. When we review the policies and we try to put some sessions that can even waiver some of the costs, the developers will be ready to go into that. Not forgetting that they are also in business. So it's a whole conversation that we have to continue and look at how we can resolve the issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, so I think that very important points and issues have been raised. And I agree with what Dr. Mensah said. You know, in the physical space, the issues we were having, we used to say social exclusion. We moved to a digital space, we say digital exclusion. So we're still carrying the problem along. It's not changing. And the issues that have been raised here, like what the speaker just mentioned, Dr. Elizabeth, education, awareness. Awareness, yes, we create it when we give enough education. And the education has to start from the very beginning. I have always advocated that we need to tie in with a policy whereby everybody has to do disability studies, not only the social worker, no. At least one semester of disability study. It's part of inclusiveness. You should understand what it means so we can give support out, you know. So it's only when you have good education, then if I have my own firm and I'm even having a form, employment form, I will gather that data. Please, do you have any disability? So I will know how I can support you to work effectively. So a lot of education needs to go in so that people become more aware. We talk of the developers, you know, developing and thinking that once I develop for people who have eyes and can hear and so on and so forth. And there is that gap in the design and the reality, because at the end of the day, not everybody has two hands to access. I quite remember meeting somebody who said, I think he was a teacher and he had to access his pay slip using the e-pay slip or something like that. And the way the system has been developed is not friendly. he had low vision, very low. He said it's even 102 phone, he would not see it. So then he gets to a point he's not able to access. Then he's wondering. So he has to now call in a third party. And he said, issues with pay now. I don't want to know, let people know my salary and before they start pressurizing me. But I had to call somebody. And the person told me, you've gotten to a point, they say, put in these letters if you are not a robot. And the thing doesn't read out. It's only the image. So he's not able to tell what is happening. He's stuck. And so the designer did not think about issues like this, So a lot of education needs to go in so that everybody becomes more aware of how to design and make sure that our digital space is very accessible. It's very important. And then also when Dr. Elizabeth mentioned the devices that we use to access, it's a big problem. We talk of marginalized group, those in rural areas and people in the poverty bracket who cannot buy very sophisticated gadgets and so on and so forth. And even persons with disabilities, because they're always definitely in the poverty bracket also. How are they going to manage? Because some of them need assistive technologies to even access these online platforms. Assistive technologies are very expensive in Ghana here. So we go to other developed countries, realize that they have assistive technology policy to make sure that the way we collect little small monies for our health insurance, the same thing is done to support assistive technology so everybody can have access to it. But there is no such policy here. A lot of other advanced countries where these things are happening, they have assistive technology policy. As a workplace, how are you supporting persons with disability? As institutions and so on and so forth. So definitely we have a long way to go. I did a research among e-government developers, those who are developing government online platform. And I even came across people who asked me, what is this trouble you are giving us? The blind people, did they use computer at all? And that is a developer developing services like this for government, and then the government is doing that for the citizen. So if he had no knowledge that blind, he said, don't worry, when they get there, somebody will assist them. That was the most comfortable answer he gave me, you see, because they don't have knowledge. But elsewhere, we have what we call accessibility policy, which binds all developers. In fact, when you are being given a government contract, it's part of it. When we check it and you don't meet it, we will not accept the work that has been done. And so most of them make the same argument in that research I did, that unless they are put in the contract, they don't have time to obey those rules. They will just develop and then go for their money. But if it's enforced in the, or kind of embedded in the contract they signed, then they don't have a choice. So here we are. It's not in the contract because it's not a priority. And so we have indeed a very long way to go. And I want to thank my panelists for the fantastic job that they've done. And give opportunity to you or to ask questions as we wrap up this session. Please, question time. Yes, you have a question. Please help us with the microphone for those asking the questions. So we pay attention and then we try to address.
Hello.
Yes.
Good morning. My name is Billy James, co-founder of Seed Africa, Strategic Engineering Experience DRIF Africa, and I'm also a member of Young Engineers with Ghana Institution of Engineering. I have quite a number of questions I have here, but I'll just limit it to a few. First, my question is, how are we engaging engineers from all walk of life? Because I feel we are not engaging the people who develop or design infrastructures for our use, from devices to buildings. We are always talking about the challenge, but we are not taking the problem or challenge to the people who can help us, develop those infrastructures. And mostly we base our issue on lack of money. For me, I don't think we lack money. I think the people who need to get a job done, we are not approaching them. So I just want to know how we are approaching the engineers or the people who are supporting us to get the work done. And I also want to find out what is the connection between social workers and then the engineers once again. Another thing is to find out how are the universities, especially the engineering universities, how are they being engaged to have project work done for people with disabilities so that we can have solutions being provided right from school. Because if we are able to get these young ones engaged in this kind of activities right from campus, it will be easy for us to be able to help people with disabilities. For me right now, I see a very disjoint, gap between the students who are providing solution in all areas of life with people with a disability. Also, how are we engaging people with disability in the various sports? Because when we bring them into sports, we will get them to be very active, and we will also be forcing people to provide solutions. I have 2 minutes, so let me just limit it here.
All right. Okay.
I believe you get me. We need to
Yes.
force people to work.
Yes.
We need people to move from their comfort zone and give us simple solutions that can change the daily life of our brothers and sisters who have physical challenge. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So I am just going to attempt the engineering institution because I'm a lecturer from engineering university. Then the rest, the panelists will take it. Right. So how are we trying to bring in the students? Like I said, in our own space, we have to start something. So for one, if you come to University of Science and Technology, where I lecture, the computer science engineering department, we've structured somehow the syllabus. And so since 2016, we've had a lot of in-depth information for students who are studying in that field to understand inclusive design. And I think that is what has changed, compared to previous. They will learn to develop and they just go like any other development. But we place a lot of emphasis on inclusive design, designs that are accessible for everyone to use. And also from where I sit and what I do at Inclusive Tech, try to encourage students to take projects in that. And so I have had students since 2017, every year, and even this year, I have students working in that space, thinking of technologies that can support persons with disability. The challenge has been they will just get some prototype, they get their degree and they are gone. You have to understand them. How do we implement it? Even the prototype, you have to come in sometimes to support before they can get the necessary components because they feel discouraged, like it's an expensive venture you are trying to take them on, right? So once he does the prototype and gets the degree, I beg you, he's gone or she's gone. How you get the implementable is another problem. And so you get a lot of them on the shelf and it's not working. And so through another event we've created like DHAC, which is from Inclusive Tech, where we are looking at disability technology, we are trying to push some of them to become implementable. So it's a long way, but I think we started from there, trying to let people have that awareness, especially the students, right? Okay, so over to you. The long questions, I think you heard all of them. I've only answered the one for the engineering university. Yeah, so we want to help.
Okay, so I would just want to add a bit to how we are engaging engineers. Apart from the school-based effort that you are making, I think maybe you are making that effort because of your special interests. So like you said, and we all said, we need to revisit our policies, both in the institutions and at the workplace. The institutions should be drawn in to understand that inclusion has come to stay. We are no more looking at segregation. If you are an engineer in the institution, like Dr. Gagiba said, how are you ensuring that all the activities are inclusive. When you are engineer in the field, you are working, there should be a policy that will actually commit you to do your designs in such a way that you will not exclude the needs of persons with disabilities or other vulnerable groups. I think when this the Disability Act came into force, we had series of consultations, and then we were able to come up with a standard that was approved by the Ghana Standard Authority on the physical infrastructure, how they should construct the buildings with the ramps and things. And that one was certified. And going forward, the issue of implementation, how the district assemblies are supposed to ensure that in awarding contracts, the people who get the bid will ensure that the buildings that they will put meet the accessibility standard. But it's very difficult. This morning when I was coming, I saw the ramps here, and I was like, my goodness, if somebody is in wheelchair, you are going before you realize you come back. I nearly fell there. So it is that constant engagement. We review the policies. We constantly engage with the engineers who are the developers, and then the users. Constant feedback. We cannot get it perfect at the start, but that kind of commitment to perfect it will help us. You were asking of connection between engineers and social workers. Like I said, if you are an engineer in your own small way and you think there's something that you need to get an expertise advice, why not contact them? The same way the social workers, so that kind of collaborative effort should be ongoing. You don't expect an engineer to be in his corner and then maybe a social worker not knowing what your challenges are may not come for. So sometimes it's two ways. We seek information and we give information. So that kind of understanding that disability is everybody's responsibility, and we have to work at it collaboratively, and that will resolve the issues. Sports. Let me try and see whether, if you care to know, persons with disability, they do sports. The Ghana Blind Union, we have a whole wing that we call the Ghana Blind Sports Association, and we do a lot of things. Last year, we hosted the Africa tournament on Go Ball. So we do sports. It's just that our way of doing sports is not, it may be different, but again, because of that exclusion, people don't have interest in sports of persons with disability. So we don't make much noise. Even when we were hosting the African tournament, how many of you heard of it? You contact the media houses, they are not, the interest is not there. So let's all try and develop interest for disability issues. Thank you.
Okay, if I'm to have some quick bites, I'll start from challenging a point that was made by my colleague. I mean, I was once the director of sports in my university, and just even the ball, this ball, go ball, wasn't there. So it's a valid point that we need to begin to look at the issues differently. So they couldn't do their sports because the ball was not even available. Where we struggled. As at the time I was leaving, we were not even able to buy the ball. So, and I was there for 2 years, so you can imagine what I'm talking about. That's number one. Number two, your question about the interface between engineers and social workers, for example, I would say speaks to parts of the deficits in our education system. I mean, you are an engineer in which society? you are going to develop a technology for which society. So if you are an engineer, you don't understand the society and you don't know that there are different groups of people in the society for whom you have to develop something, then you are not an engineer. You are still in the process of becoming an engineer. You may have a certificate, you are parading all over the place, but you lack competency in doing proper engineering work. That's why you see we have roads and nobody can walk by the side of the road because the engineer didn't think that people walk. There are pedestrians, you see. So those who develop our technologies also suffer the same deficit because they don't understand the gap. And I want to make a point. When you are talking about the digital space, you should know that just as you have to be literate to act in this physical space, the same way there is digital literacy. And many people, including some people who are developing the devices, the systems, the programs we use in the digital space, are digitally illiterate. So that's the problem. And until we get to that level of digital literacy, we will have this kind of challenges you are talking about. So those are the 2 points I want to make quickly, that it is important for us to interrogate the issues from different perspectives and from deeper understanding. Otherwise, we will be happy with mediocrity, just having some things being done, and we are happy that we've done things, when in fact, we are not addressing the fundamental issues that have to be addressed. Thank you.
Doc, I think you've said a lot of the things I wanted to say. And I would want to add to my engineering friend. If you and I and everybody in this room, if we will pick a day in a week, say today is Monday, say every Monday, we decide to put something relating to PWDs on our social media platforms, students will start knowing that there are problems they need to solve in that particular space. That's the starting point. If say we pick one day and say that henceforth, every Monday or a particular day, let us talk about PWDs. Let's talk about their challenges. The more challenges we put out there, the more students will look for solutions to those problems. And then we start solving the problems. An engineer solves problems not for himself, but for society. During the short break, I was discussing with Dr. Agangiba. I pronounced it right, did I? Where is the lady who couldn't pronounce it? Yeah. So, and we were talking about projects. And I was telling him that for the past almost 3.5 years, I had been working with, it's over, it ended in December. I'd been working with the Department of Computer Engineering, University of Ghana, on a project. Now, this project seeks to send internet to remote communities using, let me say, television white space or TV signals that are not being used. And we are done with it, solving problems, not for ourselves. If it were to be for Accra, we would depend on the good technologies out here. But then as an engineer, you seek to solve problems for the greater community, the greater society. So don't wait until the social worker comes to you. You can also go to the social worker. If you know very well there is a solution to a problem, don't wait. Let's help solve the problem. There's a gentleman in my office who is physically, visually impaired, Mr. Adongo. And he's so good using his phone and computers. And it's because he will ask all the questions, 1,001 questions, and he's so good at it. And what scares me most is not his ability to move around the office without touching anything. He knows every corner because everything is flat. What scares me most is anytime I shout his name, Mr. Adongo, he knows it is me and it's not another person. And he calls me IT. IT, he called me from afar. Now, we are part of this society. We are part of this community. If we want to solve problems, let's not wait until they come to us. Let us also go to them. And then let's understand their problems better, because we don't understand what they are going through until we go close to them and listen to them. Then they will be able to explain to them, what you are developing for us, we can't use it. Go about it this way. And until we understand their plight, the issue of engaging engineers, social workers and engineers, university students, sports, Madam has tackled that. I think we can solve that easily by we ourselves approaching them. And when we approach them, just close.
Okay, so I believe also that we need to approach them, because when people are on their own, they don't know what is going on. For me, if it wasn't because I had a child who is deaf, I wouldn't have gotten involved. So, and it doesn't stop there. We have life experiences where people end up being blind. They're not born blind, but they can end up being blind. Then you ask yourself, if I had put in place or helped put in place certain things before I got to this stage, it would have helped. It would help me if I get to that stage. So we need to, for everyone to look at the problem and help in the solution process. And I also want to say that we need education right from the start. So what I'm doing for my child right now is to make sure that he is thoroughly educated when it comes to coding for kids. I'm getting into trying to get him to code despite his challenges. And also the need to support all the educational institutions that are responsible for inclusion, not just pushing them to one side and then helping them, but include them in all the educational institutions from the beginning, from when they are children. Also, the need to include PWDs in decision making, because if you don't include them, you wouldn't know where the loopholes are to fill them to be able to create a holistic solution. And then last but not the least, we need to get the media to cover, like you were saying about the sports program. We need media coverage. We need the programs to go out there to people. We need people to hear about it. So as we are all here, we need to tweet or put on our social media so that everybody can hear it. You have to do it every day. We have a foundation that we try to create awareness about PWDs so that people will get to know that we have people like this in our midst, and we need to live with them and to create environment that is conducive for them. And then lastly, we need to ensure constant implementation of these policies that are to be put in place or that are in place. Constantly, consistently, constantly, we need to make sure that all these policies are put in place. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm sure that when it comes to the question time for the next session, yes, it's been so exciting. We've eaten so much into our time, but I think a lot has been said, and there's a lot that we are also taking along, making sure that we walk the talk. Dealing with issues like this is a collective responsibility. Every one of us has a role to play. And so if you are not playing your part, I'm sure you are adding to the problem. So let's start now trying to play our roles, because it's a collective effort. Like Madam Sefako said, we all need to do our part and create that awareness. That is when even the policies that are not being enforced, the people involved will have the edge, will get to know that, no, there's a stronger voice out there, and it's about time that we work on that. I always say, and I dare say, that the time for digital emancipation, it's now. So let's walk the talk. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much. I think that was an extensive discussion, and I'm hoping that we all picked things out of this. I think on top of the agenda for me is the fact that those working, especially in educational institutions, also have a role to play. You know, I teach, and I have just recently, not recent, just last week, I noticed that one of my students was physically impaired, and I never knew throughout a whole year, a whole semester, because you know when you look at him, his eyes looks normal, like it looks like how our eye is. So I keep wondering, so how is he able to actually read the slides? And I mean, he did well. He graduated with a first class, and he doesn't study with. I mean, he doesn't come to class with anything. He behaves like just a normal student. And so I think that, I mean, educational institutions have to do more. There has to be provisions for that so that they're not really limited to only specific institutions. But apart from educational sector, I also picked that irrespective of where you are, every institution that you are working in, there has to be provisions made for everybody. I mean, even now, hotels and offices are trying to have staircase and places that are easily accessible. That's a great one. So we move on to our last panel session for the day. The session is on advancing digital education and advocacy for the vulnerable. We spoke about regulations and policy, and now we want to focus on education, right? Because everybody needs to be part of that, irrespective of where you are, you should be. And to actually moderate that session for us is Miss Ernestina Lamioko Teria. She's a NOC engineer at Smart Franco. She's a digital literacy and cybersecurity enthusiast. And she said she loves watching movies. So, Ernestina, our moderator for the day, please have the stage. To help her do justice to that session is Dr. Obin Asamwa. Dr. Peter Obin Asamwa is the Executive Director of the Ghana Blind Union and the first blind person to have obtained a PhD in African Studies from the University of Ghana. I think that is big. Please, let's keep it calm. He was the catalyst for the establishment of a material resource center for persons with disability in Ghana. He is also responsible for the introduction of ICT to blind and partially sighted persons and the setting up of the first ICT lab for persons with visual impairment in Ghana. As an advocate, he was part of the people who spearheaded the development of the national policy on inclusive education for Ghana, and he currently serves on the technical committee on inclusive education. He's the Ghana representative for the International Council for Education of All Visually Impaired Persons. He also leads the advocacy for the ratification of the Marrakesh Treaty by the Parliament of Ghana. He's a former executive member of the Committee-Based Rehabilitation African Network. He's a mentor and he's an author. So let's give him a hand of applause. Our next speaker is in the person of Mr. Alex William Bankole. Mr. Alex holds a master's in disability in higher education from Cyrus University in New York, USA. He's the coordinator and trainer, Assertive Technology Lab, University of Ghana. He serves as an advisory board member of the Coalition of Election Observers, Advocacy Chairman, Ghana Federation of Disability Organization. Currently, previously, he has served on many national and international boards. A hand of applause for him as well. Our third speaker is in the person of Dr. Diana Debra. Dr. Debra holds a PhD in the area of design, innovation, and sustainability from the Cape University of Technology in South Africa. He holds a PG Deep in Educational Technology, EdTech, from the University of Cape Town, South Africa. Certificate in Assertive Technologies and Online Learning from Open University, United Kingdom. Learning Technology Foundations and Application Technology-Enabled Learning, and so forth. Her project revolves around human-computer interaction, interaction design, diversity and inclusion with developing context. She's a lecturer at Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. Also, she specialized in technology and innovation specialist for the Inclusive Tech Group. I think our panel is really packed because as I read the profile, God, I mean, I'm already excited in my heart. So I think the excitement actually took over, so I get confused at times. I mean, it's a packed panel. But before I give the mic over, we are passing around some evaluation form. Please do well for us to just fill the form, okay? So when it comes around, take your time, give us your honest feedback. Can we do that? Yes, we can do that. Yes. And let's be happy and relaxed. This is our last session. And from here, I know my favorite thing is food. So from here, I feel hungry. And so we are going to eat after that. Ernestina, here you go.
Okay, thank you very much, Euros. I'd like to welcome my beautiful panelists and myself to this second session and welcome you as well. So here we're going to talk about advancing digital education and advocacy for the vulnerable. And I'm really excited because it's always good to hear from the horse's own mouth. You know, most times policies and regulations are put in place and people think for us, but then they hardly come to the grounds to find out what exactly is going on and what the people need. So my panelists, I see great people who have achieved a lot, who are considered to be a part of the vulnerable group. And today we are going to hear from them on how they think we should advance our education and also advocate for the vulnerable in this digital inclusiveness and also break the digital divide gap. So first off, I would like to ask a question. Whom do we consider, or which group of people do we consider as the vulnerable? Because definitely it's not going to be the blind or the deaf or the dumb. Definitely would have kids and people who are less fortunate in the community who are also grouped as the vulnerable. So I would like to find out from my panelists, who do we consider as part of the vulnerable group? And also, how do you think we can educate people to include them and bridge this digital divide? So let's start off. Who would want to begin? Okay, so since you are to my immediate left, I'll begin with you though.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored to be part of this session, in fact, to be part of the entire program. Yes, to ask you a question, who is someone with vulnerability? Well, vulnerability in itself depicts maybe a weakness or an area where somebody may not be able to achieve or function or do something the way he or she really intends to do it. So when you come to who is a vulnerable person, I would actually come around it by saying that practically it's somebody who has an ambition, he wants to achieve something, but he needs some form of support to achieve that thing. So the support may be physical, it may be psychological, mental, yes, it may be in any form, but it's like when that person gets that support, that person will be able to achieve. Now, when you talk about education, when you talk about people who need to have education just like anybody else, then we have people who, because of their disability, may need some support to achieve that educational level. And when it happens like that, then we can say, as per education, yes, they may be vulnerable. So we look at it from so many angles. But before I go there, I just want to share something small with you, which I share with a lot of people. It's about, and I heard this in the last session, about the way we define persons with disability. And that definition may impact on the way we provide services to them. And I just want us to look at it from this very simple angle. When we say somebody is disabled or somebody has a disability, what do we mean? I know we have legal definitions, but I'm just cutting it down this way. You look at somebody who takes an object and puts the object in the ground, okay, buries it, he hides it. 10 years later, somebody comes, digs it up. What does the person do? He takes away the covering, which was the soil. And we say he has discovered it. We had a security analyst here in the first session. And I know he would understand this, that when somebody has arms, he has a gun, he has other form of arms, weapons with him, and you take away those weapons, what have you done? You have disarmed the person. When somebody is in a comfortable state and you take away the things that make the person comfortable, he's now in a state of discomfort. So when somebody has some abilities and the situation presents itself where those abilities cannot be functionable, then we may say this person has a disability. And if we're not careful, that is all we'll be looking at. We'll not be focusing on the fact that the person has special abilities, and we may not see that point. But that is the issue that we have to look at. In education, there are things that stop this person from achieving. And what are some of those barriers? Some of those barriers are societal. Like, for example, we have this notion of what somebody can do and what he cannot do. That social stereotype prevents people from achieving, and it is a barrier. When we come to digital technology, there are things that people can use and people cannot use. And one common thing that I hear all the time is, it's very expensive. It costs a lot. We place so much importance on the cost. I'm not saying cost is not important anyway, but we do that a lot and we forget about the value of the device. The devices are there, but do we know they are there? We need to have some awareness about those devices. You see, without this awareness, then the education of persons with disability is a problem, because then we don't even know what is out there. And then also, we don't have to be static. Technology is like a river. When you step in it once, the thing is flowing. If you don't flow with it, you'll be left behind. Right now, if I say accessibility, how do we allow blind people to read? Everybody says, oh, Braille, Braille, Braille. That answer would have been good 30 years ago. Today is not the only solution. We must move with technology. When we don't move with technology, we're left behind, and it's a barrier. You know, there are so many things that serve as a barrier to education for persons with disability. And some of these things can be avoided if we look at them properly. Since we're just now starting the discussion, I don't want to take time, but these are my initial comments, that the issues are there. Technology shouldn't be seen as static. We should be progressive, and we should allow ourselves to be part of the flow, because the devices are there. We just have to look for them, just research about them, and we'll find them, and then we can flow with them so that we can move along with the rest. And before I hand over the mic, I'll just say, even if the devices are there and the other issues are there, then we must also be talking about training. And training, the use of technology must be part of the system. It mustn't be an afterthought. It must be part of the planning. So for now, these will be my initial comments. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Now let's hear from our second speaker, what he thinks about education and whom we categorize in the group of vulnerability.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to the organizers of the program for affording me the opportunity to be on stage to speak to some of these interesting topics. So I think I wouldn't go too hard or too long on who we consider to be vulnerable, particularly given what Dr. Obin Asamwa actually explained, just to indicate that first and foremost, vulnerability comes up, in my view, because of what society establishes as our threshold for operating or functioning. And within disability studies, we have what we reference as the established normative value. So what we see to be the norm is one key thing that brings about vulnerability. So that, quote and unquote, to walk, the norm is to walk with 2 legs or to walk with 4 legs. That is if you're an animal. Now, if you have to walk with 2 legs and you are caused to walk on 1, it makes you vulnerable because you will not be able to walk like the one with 2 legs. If you ought to walk with 4 legs and you find yourself walking with 3 or 2, it places you at that disadvantage. It takes away your something from you in relation to walking. If you have to, for instance, read as per the established norm, read with your eyes, and you are unable to read with your eyes, that then renders you vulnerable. If we ought to all purchase an item using a specific quantum of capital, and you are unable to acquire that same quantum or amount of capital to purchase that particular device, then you are vulnerable, particularly if that is the device or the means through which people are functioning or living. I emphasize this aspect of vulnerability because one is vulnerable owing to, as I said in the beginning, the set threshold of society as per what we devise to be the norm. So even with regards to living, just simply being alive, one stands the chance of losing their life because they do not appear to be normal as per the normative value. So in Ghana, for instance, you know, we have the spirit child phenomenon, where the child is born and seen to have certain disabilities, and therefore they do not meet the threshold so far as being a human being is concerned in that society. So that child is actually sent off back to where they came from. That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. But that child is literally killed because they do not appear to be, as quote and unquote, a normal child. So we, as a society, create vulnerability per our own measurable indicators for development and existence. And this then affects how we actually give people the opportunity to develop and live. And I will tie this in to education in the digital space and the varied needs that ought to be dealt with. So again, just referencing the discussions that happened in the previous panel session, the discussion on being left out of the discourse or being left out of the digital space, you would realize that we come to a point where it is the established norm for functioning within the digital space that ends up leaving people out. How do we first and foremost develop the digital platforms? What are the set parameters for developing the digital platforms? What are the set parameters for acquiring education using digital means? What are the set normal tools? Because all these set parameters and tools are actually set up in a significantly narrow tunnel, we end up actually leaving out a significant great deal of our population. And this ties in with the whole principle behind the 17 goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, which is leaving no one behind. So in our attempts to ensure that the digital space includes all manner of persons for development, what are the alternative things we need to consider? We need to consider the fact that in relation to reading information digitally, it is not everybody who would be able to read using their eyes. It is not everybody who will be able to listen the way I listen. It is not everybody who will be able to comprehend the information. So that is referencing the density of text that we produce. That also speaks particularly to the kind of constructions we use in the information we put out there for people to absorb. It also considers the way we develop devices, assuming that anybody who is going to use this device should have a hand to particularly type. Assuming that anybody who is going to be using this device should be able to use it within a particular time frame. What is that? I will give you an example. So one of the challenges we have, some blind persons, for instance, facing with regards using the mobile money platforms, is simply the time allotted for keying in your details using the USSD code. You realize that there is no consideration of the fact that there are people who would literally have to be listening to the information being churned out before the input, rather than just read using their eyes, which is a more faster means of doing it. So by simply not averting our minds to that fact, we make it difficult for some people to actually use such an interface. So these, for me, are some of the alternate means through which we ought to pay attention to education via the digital platform. In addition to the fact that when you develop what we now see as specialized means of interfacing with the digital platforms, this specialized means in relation to acquisition of the knowledge of the specialized means also comes at a very lengthy extent, so that if it would take person A 1 week to learn how to use the mobile phone, if there are specialized features inbuilt into that same mobile phone, it would take person B, who is a person with disability, 2 or 3 weeks to use same device. So all these factors ought to be on board, even as we seek to bring everybody on board for equal development and equal participation. This would be my initial take on the subject matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we'll take a little add-on from our 2 speakers. I think we'd have to wrap up with our contributions, and so I'd give 2 minutes each for us to give our take.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't introduced, so on records, my name is Francis Akwa Ameni from the Internet Society. So first of all, let me try to define who a person with a disability. That is because when we understand, that's when we can align it with what we have defined as a normal way we do things. So when a person is physically or has a physical or mental disability that impaired his day-to-day activity, that is when we define as a person with a disability. So let me say, in a normal classroom setting, we define that a teacher goes to the classroom, writes on the board with a chalk or a marker so that people view from the classroom. That is how it has been defined. That's how the narration has been defined. So if the person is virtually impaired, he can see. How does the person get to follow what is going on? So in this 21st century and the fourth revolution, I think our narration has to change, because now we are going to a digital age, which we are developing new application. So I think it is about time we rather look at bringing everyone on board. If you are building applications, example, a website, it should be blind compliant. It should be able to accommodate someone who can see, someone who can hear. So if you can't see, you should be able to hear audio, because you should have audio played on the website so that each line should be read for the person to be able to follow suit. If the person can hear, he should be able to see. And the issue of the USS code, I remember in 2020, the girls in ICT, one lady built an app on the Momo USSD, which is voice over. So instead of you to pressing the 170, you can use that voice over to do that, which I think is a way to solve some of this problem. So not to talk more, I think it's about time that we bring our skills, technical skills in play, that we have to develop application which will come to solve the problem. And we shouldn't define the narration within a certain scope that is a normal way to do it. When you're developing the application, let's look at the functionalities and see, we should take everything into consideration, that if the person is blind, if the person has physical or mental disability, because some people, not only people who have physical challenge, people takes time to absorb stuff. So we should also take all of them into consideration in developing the app, so that we know, okay, probably, because some of the applications, if you're not very fast, it will close. It has a time bound, so if you're not very fast, it's going to close with this particular eye. So going forward, let's change our narration and bring all this in play. We are going to put in up application so that it won't be, it's a normal norm. So we can then define someone else, because if we make room for everybody, then I don't think there will be a definition for somebody with a vulnerability, because there's room for everyone to be able to use every application. Thank you.
Thank you too very much.
Right, thank you so much for the insights that you've given us. I, for example, was very excited to see the various definitions coming from all quarters, and it was very impressive for us to see how we view disabilities from the physical point of view. And there are, of course, other diverse ways, like you mentioned, that some go beyond the physical. Physically, you will see people looking okay, but when it comes to attention span, concentration, etc., in our classroom settings, it's different. So I don't want to go too much into the definition because they've all done justice to it. But for me, what is relevant here is the fact that going forward, for example, when we talk about designing for all, and I'll speak from that point of view, we've seen clearly that most of the solutions or interventions that we design are not specifically designed to cover everybody, including like persons with disability, which we choose to see it as, and for me personally, persons with ability. Okay, so the focus is more on the abilities of the person. And that mind shift actually changes the worldview about how society views persons with ability. So when you begin to look at the abilities the person has, then you begin to look at things like agency. What are the actions then that you can take to use the abilities that the person has to really bring that kind of respect and let a person also know that they are very, very important and there's so much that the person can also bring on board. And when our director started, he mentioned the fact that somebody covers something and then once you take it out, you've discovered it. So if you look at the discovery, that comes with looking at the positive side of people that may not have like 360 abilities in certain areas. You begin to look at what you can derive working with them to make sustainable solutions for society. So I think in our early discussion, one of our panelists, I think Dr. Elizabeth, mentioned that there is a need for universal design. And it's very important because then we are looking at usable solutions which are accessible and also very, very inclusive. And the solutions we design is not only for, let's say, applications, we are also talking about systems. We are talking about products. We are talking about tools that people use. And then we are even looking at what we call the service product systems, where the products that you design are working within a system to be able to provide more inclusivity in whatever solution that you bring. So bringing this to the classroom setting, as educators, you want to make sure that no student is left behind, like as a speaker mentioned. So we first of all know that some of our educational settings, even right from primary school, have not been designed to access special abilities, okay? And please, in this context, when I say persons with ability, I mean PWD. So yes, I choose to see that way. So you realize that for us to go forward in some of these areas, right from the onset, we really need to redesign our systems in our educational settings to include that aspect. This means that we need to provide tools and devices for persons with special needs and also persons with abilities, because if you support the other areas, you realize that they will be able to function even more than some students that you feel that they are on top of their game, okay? So the policy implementation is also very important because it's not only we being passionate about it and also driving the agenda, but the policy becomes important. So when we look at the bottom-up approaches, it's beginning to look like we like to see it as a midpoint down, a midpoint up, because it gets to a point policy becomes very relevant in driving this agenda. Because if we are within a system where some of these key things that we are talking about are not included in our policy formulation, then it becomes very difficult to implement these things. It becomes our own champion projects that we do. But we still need to champion these projects and become animators of change and think about PWDs in everything that we do, and begin to do projects that will respond to some of these challenges. And as designers and engineers, like I say, once you see problems, then there's opportunity to innovate. So if we hear from everything that is going on, it means that there's so much that we can do. And that is the power of design. That's the power of technology, that if we can put this together, then we'll be able to bring out sustainable solutions that will respond to the challenges that PWDs are confronted by these things, and we will begin to advance the abilities that persons with, let's say, disabilities have. And then we will see that a lot of change can happen. Then one thing I would like to mention, there's so much projects that persons with ability are doing. And because we focus so much on the disability side, we are not paying attention to showcasing the projects that people have. So when you begin to put the project forward, then it is the project and the innovation that people do that we see. And then you begin to realize the need for policy change, the need for policy formulation in certain areas in our educational settings to really make it more inclusive, so that as we live in the digital proximal spaces now, we can make it more inclusive and ensure that no one is left behind, as indicated in the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much for the interesting submissions. So far, we can all conclude that aside the norms, societal norms that are not making us include people who are vulnerable in the digital divide, our developers and our engineers are also another major problem. So like I said earlier, we are getting all the information and education here from the grassroots. I'd like to ask, since we are in the digital space, security is also very important. And I don't want to think for developers or engineers, but I feel probably they are not including people who are vulnerable because they feel they can be easily susceptible to security attacks and all. I would like to find out from my panelists, what do we think we can educate, or in what way can we educate our engineers for them to include us in cyber-related issues? Because cybersecurity has to do with time. Like my president earlier said, for something like a mobile money transaction, it has to do with time. If you are not fast, you can be hacked. And there are so many systems in place also that if you are performing any transaction on or doing any activity and you're not fast enough, you can be hacked. So what do we think we can tell our developers or engineers? How do you think we can educate them in that aspect? For them to include us, for us to all know that, yes, we may be vulnerable in certain aspects, but with your help, we can also go through the security aspects of digitalization. I don't know if my question is clear. Okay, so let's begin with you, Doc.
Yes, thank you very much again. Cybersecurity and whether we can be hacked. You know, I think the whole thing boils down to engagement between the engineers and persons with disability. And so that if we have this engagement and the engineers understand our situation, understand that we can use the app if certain allowances are made to our situation, then I believe they can also develop and keep their security structures in place, but also make way or make allowance to accommodate the peculiar needs or special needs of members of the disability fraternity. Because the whole thing is that it is because right now the engineers are more comfortable. Okay, we as persons with disability should adapt to the system. They are making the thing fast. Okay, it has to be fast because somebody will hack it. So we should adapt to it. Okay, but technology is supposed to be able to adapt to the special needs of the individual. So it can be done. I don't believe it's an impossibility. I believe that 10 years ago, the things that we used to call impossible then, now we are doing it. So the engineers should look again and come and talk to us again. And we'll give you ideas because things can be done. Okay. And as Alex said, if we accept things as the norm, then we stay that way. But if we accept that the thing can be approved, and here again, I'll crave the indulgence of the moderator, but I just want to mention this thing. I think it's also about priorities. Because if we prioritize certain things, like especially digital education, then I believe certain things will be put in place. I believe that if we prioritize like setting up institutions and things, then we'll also prioritize setting up individuals and letting them know how to handle devices better. You talk about personalization of devices, and we say it is so costly, so expensive. But look at this. Right now, technology is also going personal. When we were younger, you go into somebody's office, they have laptops and what do you call it, desktops on everybody's table. People come to work, they work, they close, they go home. Now you go there, people have laptops. They take work home. They are personalizing the technology. Now they put it on their tablets and their phones. They take work home. They are personalizing. What we are saying is that persons with disability also need to personalize technology. We should have the policy, I agree. Policy should be there to ensure that every person with disability at a particular stage in your education, whether it's secondary or tertiary, you should be given certain devices, not just the institutions, personal. You should own the devices. I should be able to receive a Victor reader or receive a tablet provided by my government, and it should come to me. And I should be able to personalize it, take it home and use it, so that when COVID strikes again, God forbid it won't, but if it does, I can access e-learning in my house. I don't have to wait for schools to open. Technology is being personalized. And like I said earlier on, it is a river. If you step in and you don't go with it, it will flow and leave you behind. So let's move with that. So yes, to answer the question, we can have security, but these things all have to be prioritized, and it will happen. And please, I'll emphasize this, please, let's not let cost be the determining factor. Let's look at value rather, and the value it will bring to the individual, and the value technology will bring to the entire country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, so this question actually causes me to remember what, Jesus Christ was sent to the world to save us, but when it was getting to the time, he actually told God, you know something, let this cup pass me over, but your will be done, not my will. I really wish, I was brought to this panel to speak to these matters, but I wish the question would pass me by. But anyway, the will of the moderator will be done. So, It is simply because when I look at developers, engineers, first and foremost, my take is that they are failing humanity. Because you are trained generally to ensure that you bring solutions to humanity in its general form, in its generality. So the systems, the security systems, for instance, we put in place as engineers for the respective digital platforms must take into full consideration the generality of humanity. That is the diverse nature of our target audience. That includes everybody and anybody. So if we have security systems and indicators of security systems that turn out to leave out certain categories of individuals, then for you as an engineer, you are failing us. You are not doing right. I will give you this example. So 2 weeks ago, there was this program organized by the UNDP on issues of disability. And the program outline and certain documents were brailled. I happened to be a facilitator for that for the program. And afterwards, I was engaging one of the participants who actually complained about the brailing and was blaming the UNDP. And I said, no. The people at the UNDP who actually had this thing braille do not know anything about braille. There is grade 1 braille, there is grade 1.5, there is grade 2, and then there is in UK English braille grade 2, and universally there is what we call the UEB, Universal English Braille. Now the UNDP guys do not know anything about this. If you have any issue with the braille, the person you should blame is the technocrat who was contracted to actually braille the documents. It is no excuse for our engineers to say we do not know about or we do not have knowledge on this category of individuals. The knowledge is there. It is for the engineer to first and foremost avert their minds to the fact that humanity is appreciably diverse. These things are doable. I talked about threshold in the first place. Can we imagine that you have a door developed and for security reasons, we say to make sure that people do not actually easily enter the room and run away with goods quickly, we create doors that are 150 kilograms heavy. Can we imagine that? Because the person who created the door was actually a macho man who carries a weight of 200 kilograms easy. So for him, the threshold of 150 kilograms for the weight of the door is simple. How many of us would find that easy to deal with? But these are the ways we actually think. I give another example. I say when we talk about, for instance, the construction of buildings and elevated floors, can we imagine that the engineer who put up this building with the elevated floors operated with drones and helicopters, so didn't put in place staircases? Will we find that to be normal? We will not find that to be normal. It is because we know that when you build elevated floors, you need a means of accessing the higher floors, the elevated floors. And the means we have devised is what? A staircase. Does building a step to elevated floors come with a cost? It does. But we have succeeded in normalizing that cost, isn't it? Our engineers should succeed in normalizing the concept of the diverse nature of their clientele, so that when we are building security systems for these platforms that we use, we consider the fact that indeed diversity is normal, and the threshold for the security system should be that appreciably diverse to be normal to bring on board all users. I will drop the ball here. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. So I would say, first of all, I'll look it from the direction of, I would say, stakeholders. We have to tackle it from the dimension of multi-stakeholder approach. Because if I want to cast my eye here, I think we have very few of these technical people here, the developers, there are very few here. So at times, we are left out of the conversation. Because if there's that bottom-up approach, there's that discussion before an app is developed, because you get to understand what the end user wants. But the developers just sit in their comforts, most of them have their own functional requirements and do what will suit their immediate users. But let's know when an app is developed, it's developed for the end user, not for your immediate environment, for the end user. So I think there should be that bottom-up approach, and we have to go deeper questioning and do survey and see what it is meant to solve, so that we'll be able to make use of it. And again, about the security issue, I think what I foresee is we have chosen trust over security. Example is, let me say, the Momo. I'm saying trust because probably I'm blind and I may not be able to key in the very code. So I would ask the one close to me, oh, Kwesi, I want to take this money, so do this for me. So out of trust, do this for me. So because we have chosen the trust over security, so it doesn't even come to mind that we have to inculcate security when you build such applications. Because what I'm doing an application for someone who is blind, then I don't want to choose trust over security. So that means there has to be a mechanism for security, even if I can see. So that is where we have to bring in the conversation. That's what I'm saying. There should be a multi-stakeholder approach where there should be that involvement. Let's talk. Let's see how best we can do that. Because we have to move from the normal things we do, because they do for the normal, applications built for the normal. So it is about time we think people with ability, as my sister said, people with ability. Let's include them in our conversation, because I know I've been part of Internet Governance Forum, but I don't remember how many times we involve people with abilities. And it's about time we bring everybody in the conversation, because when you're in the conversation, that is when we remember to add them in building, because if they're it's out of sight, out of mind. But if you are part of it, we remember to include your functionality in the building of the application. So I think it's about time we include ourselves in every conversation. Let's involve all stakeholders. Once we are involved, we understand that we are doing this app for everyone, not just people who can go about their normal day life. But let's remember there are people with abilities and they have to be involved. So I think I will end here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm glad that we are beginning to see that everyone has an ability and can bring it into the conversation to innovate and create solutions. So with regards to the security issues, of course, when we begin to look at that, it will help. Then we need to look at the human-centered design approaches, where, of course, the client, like the end user, becomes the human or the person that you are really looking at, so that technology does not feel like our speaker said. We really need to focus on the humanness. What are the abilities that the person has, and how can we incorporate certain aspects so that the technology can function properly? But what you see is that normally we want to innovate quickly. We are looking at where the funding is, and how can we make business out of that. So in all these areas, the issues around the advocacy, and like our speaker said, talk to us. So talk to everyone. We need to talk to everyone when we are designing, so that whatever we design is very focused on the users. Okay, because sometimes normally when we design, we have our target users. Let's say we know 60% or 70% can use, but the other aspects or other groups that we feel can also access, those are the difficult aspects, and that's where the design challenge comes in. And that's what we need to solve, because once we solve that puzzle, then the rest is easier. Like you said, you know that it's about recognition, it's about trust, and we've taken trust over security. So the design aspect about security, what if I can't hear? What if I can't see? What if I can't type? And there was a case example that one of our speakers gave, that someone had to go to the bank and tamper it, for example. And just because of that, and the challenge with leprosy, with all respect, the person could not get access to his or her own money. And so when we are doing these things, the design considerations for the human abilities and how they are going to use these systems need to be catered for. Now we have the face recognitions and all of that going in. Can we, how might we, I mean, as we move here, those of us who are very much into designing, one of the biggest questions that we need to reflect on is that how might we design so that it is more inclusive, it is more accessible, and it's more usable, which would make it possible for us to have let's say multiple means of engagement, multiple means of expression, and multiple means of presentation for persons with abilities. All right, so I'll stop here, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much. So before we wrap up and move to questions from the audience, I have one major question to ask. The final thing we'd want to know from the grassroots. So we keep talking about people making policies to include persons with abilities, but it looks like we keep talking about the same thing over and over again. Years pass by and it's still the same. What do we think we can do either on our own, or what do we think we can do to trigger the other parties to also think about us when designing policies? Because I feel it's supposed to come from a basics, from our education system right to the top. Everything is just messed up like that. Nobody is thinking about people with abilities. We are all focusing on how to make a living, get the money, do it. It works for a majority group of people, so we are fine. We have the money, we move on to the next project. How do we think we can help ourselves? And how do we think we can also be heard by the other people who are eliminating us from the digital or digitalization? Let me put it that way.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, how can we make ourselves heard? You know, persons with disability, we've been doing this for some time. We've been making ourselves, well, we've been making noise. Whether we are being heard is a different thing. But at least we've been raising our voice out. We've been talking, we've been advocating, we've been going on air, media. What I think what we really need is for society to begin to realize that what persons with disability are advocating for is not something that is peculiar to persons with disability alone. That what we are advocating for is the development of the entire society. Therefore, civil society organizations, other civil society organizations, should be able to pair with us, to come together, so that we raise our voices together. So it doesn't appear like, okay, it's the PWDs who are doing their thing and they are having their own workshop and they are doing their own program. You know, that is why I commend the organizers of this forum. The way like they have put this in the forum. And we need to see more of these in the media. We need to see the media bringing up more issues. I mean, the issues that the media brings up anyway, but looking at how it affects persons with disability. I noticed that over the week, I heard something about this TUC strike, a strike by civil society, civil servants, sorry. Yeah, and I want to believe that we have some PWDs who are civil servants. So how does it affect them as persons with disability? What is the take on the organizations of PWDs on these issues? We want the media to look at national issues and also find out what we think about national issues. We want the media to look at education and also access. So this is the Ghana education policy. This is it. What do you think as PWDs? But it's always, well, I know you also need to make your impacts, and you also want to invite all the politicians and things. But I would have also loved that after you speak to the Minister of Education or the Minister of Communication, then you'd also speak to the PWDs and get their views. I hear the media will go to the street and say, oh, and so we are speaking to the ordinary man on the streets and blah, 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 blah. But what about the person with disability? What about it? So we need a more inclusive approach. And I believe when we do this, it would also make an impact. And finally, I say, we also need to hold our duty bearers accountable. If the policy says all, and all is not happening, then we need this thing to we need to hold them accountable. But then, this is where I call for the inclusive approach. It shouldn't be because it affects PWD, so only PWD should hold them accountable. It should be all of us. I went to the government where I tried to actually access the Ministry of Education website. I went to Ministry of Communication website. I actually went to Ministry of Information website. It was so difficult to access the information. I couldn't even read the Constitution of Ghana. It was difficult. You understand? So these are things that, okay, it's good. We are the PWDs. We are the ones in it. But then that is the wrong approach. All of us are in it together. So we should all do this thing together. We should see ourselves as one collective whole. And what we are fighting for will benefit all of us. I'm a parent. If today I should fall down, it will affect my wife, will affect my children, will affect my extended family, it will affect so many other people. And that is how it is, just like any other person in society. So let's look at this from a holistic angle and take the holistic approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc. So I'm going to give a different question to the next speaker, but he can add on if he wants to. So I would also want to find out, do you think the Society of Persons with Disabilities have failed collectively? Because from what Doc initially said, I also feel and agree with him that in every institution, there should be a representative for you. So in case there's a program and the ministers are speaking, there should be a representative for persons with disabilities to also give an opinion or a view. But personally, I hardly see that. I don't know for the others. So I'd want to find out, do you think collectively there's been a failure from the society?
Thank you. Just before I go to that question, let me just add on to Doc's responses with regards to what persons with disabilities can do. My take on it is that yes, first and foremost, just as Doc indicated, we need to, in conforming with Article 8 of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that advocates the need for the state parties to raise awareness on issues of disability, we need to continue as persons with disabilities to raise awareness on these matters. And honestly, this is a personal advice to me, because I often say I'm tired of raising awareness. But we have to keep on raising awareness on these matters. We need to keep on talking about these things. But additionally, we need to also ensure that these matters are catered for in regulations and policies. So, for instance, it should not be acceptable for any website or digital app to be developed without passing the Web Content Accessibility Guide. If we are able to ensure that these things are developed, we can move to the last part of my suggestion on the question, which is to ensure that we demand the enforcement of these provisions and regulations in courts, because we would have good policies and good legislations with their accompanying legislative instruments. But until we seek their enforcement in court, and that is what happened in the developed countries, until persons with disabilities and other vulnerable groups sought the enforcement of their rights in court, they always had to talk. And it ended up nowhere. Having said so, my answer to the question whether or not persons with disability or lead advocates in the disability sector have failed is no. In fact, tremendous improvements and gains have actually been accomplished. So when you look at this discussion we are having here today, it is because you have advocates, lead advocates on issues of disability that have spoken about these things behind the scenes, that have taken interest in these matters. One of the lead advocates on these matters where digital inclusion is concerned is Dr. Millicent Agangiba herself, who is a person with disability. Without her involvement as part of the organizers of this program, we most likely than not, this issue will not be on the table. Without organizations of persons with disability and their advocacy, Ghana would not have had Article 29 of the 1992 Constitution that stipulates the rights of persons with disabilities. Without organizations of persons with disabilities, Ghana would not have had a national disability policy of the year 2000. Without organizations of persons with disabilities, Ghana would not have had the Right of Persons with Disabilities Act 715 of the year 2000. Without organizations of persons with disabilities and the disability community, Ghana would not have ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2012. So indeed, there is that tremendous contribution we are making, which we must continue to make, to advocate and also demand implementation of what we advocate. We need to make our presence continuously felt. In fact, we need to make our presence annoying. Like blind Bartimaeus did in the Bible. He made his presence annoying at the time Christ was passing, such that Christ said, Charlie, the guy is talking, I've heard him, bring him. And those who said, shut up now, said, they are calling you, go and let us have our peace. That is what we need to do. And we will keep at it to ensure that we are all developed. Thank you.
Okay, so let me be a bit biased here. Let's hold on with our last two speakers for now and take questions from the audience. if there's any. Any questions? Okay, I see hands up.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity. So as a person with disability or as someone who is visually impaired and has been accessing the internet for some time now, I mean, the various speakers have identified the various challenges with our, web access and access to various, platforms. My question is, we have been complaining about these things for a long time now. And like the last speaker just said, is it not time we start taking people to court? Because the Disability Act has been, implemented for a while now, and yet every now and then we say we are reviewing the act. Government says, oh, we are restructuring things, putting things in place, yet nothing ever gets done. We are talking about policies all the time. When do we move from the policies to start the actual implementation? Because we can talk about implementation all we want, but if we don't start doing it, it will never get done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, was there a question or a contribution, please? Thank you very much for the wonderful contribution.
Okay, mine is a contribution. I think I have to say a big the Internet Society have done a great job for this conference, and I'm glad to be part for the first time. My contribution is that I'm glad we have academia within the Internet Society group, and I recommend that in advocacy, the first step or the fundamentals is to push across the globe is research. These policymakers listen so much when it is backed with data, and not just data, but a validated data. So for instance, if we partner most of the academic institutions, and I think for coming the first time, I'll make it a priority on my research list that every year at least I should publish one article on Disability Act when it comes to computer science area. You see, if we should partner most of our people in academia, and even if we can't help with funding, publishing articles, we can lobby with them so that at least one article in that area could champion the advocacy into the mindset of the policymakers. Because you can't just go to the policymakers and tell them, you should just include this act without facts and figures that it will work or it will not work. It needs to be validated, and it can only be validated through research. I had walked into MTN's office and asked them some few questions. So I was directed to the publicity manager, and I was telling them they could even have more money with technology acceptance model if they should include audio in their mobile money setup, just as you are saying. And they were asking me how, and I was telling them, so you see, you didn't even do a feasibility study before you implemented whatever you wanted to, because most of our villagers cannot read. So how do they access mobile money? So if there's audio, it means that the market woman in our village can do mobile money simply without even looking for the vulnerability session of telling the other person to do it for him or her. So I believe that with research as part of our advocacy, the difficult aspect is the funding. But then I believe that with lobbying, some of the people in academia can do it for us simply. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe our speakers have done a wonderful job educating us today. And so we can also go out there, educate our friends, our family, and also advocate to everybody. I also want us to live here knowing that your ability is someone's disability and vice versa. You cannot read the braille, but someone can. So in that aspect, you are disabled and vice versa. And anybody can also fall vulnerable at any time. And so let's begin to include everybody in this digital inclusion activity or program that we are pursuing. We are all in this together. And so let's help make this work. I would want to find out from my final two speakers if they have any add-ons or any closing remarks as we wrap up the session.
All right, thank you. I think in my closing remarks, I would say the honors lies on educational systems because I'm a web developer myself. It also 4 years into my web development journey that I got to know that you can even build a blind compliant website. And I'll bet you today, if you take about 100 websites, only just 5 will pass the blind compliance because we just build it. We don't even think of who is going to access the website to read the content. I think it should start from the classroom because I learned it from school, not on the internet, but no one told me to do it blind compliant. I mean, my teacher never told me whether he knows or he didn't know, which I don't know. So it should start from the classroom because they should be able to, because they are training people to come out to develop these apps. And if you're not teaching him to do an application which is compliant to someone with an ability, how do you expect him to come back to get it done? So we should go back to the classroom, correct it there before we come out, so that we come out as reformed people who can develop app that wouldn't be for only Apple people, but it will be for people with ability and not with ability. So I think I will end there. And I also say, let's get involved. Let's get involved. It's a stakeholder approach. It's a win-win game in our conversation. And also, let's try to push our people to that, because such to get the government buy-in, you have to involve government in this conversation. Even if you don't get them here, push them, get your communique or your report to them. As my brother said, back with data. And normally invite them to such events, because if they are here and they are interested, sure, they're going to push it for you. So let's get government buy-in. Let's try to push our information, our policy, our data recommendation to them, and let's see who knows. And also let's try to push our own people with ability to the top hierarchy. Once they get there, they're going to push the agenda for us. So I'll end here by saying, let's all get involved. Once we get involved, we'll be able to solve the problem. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes. Thank you. So I'll say that in the spirit of Ubuntu, which is togetherness, okay? As we live here, with regards to all the conversations, we've clearly seen that both government institutions and the grassroots information is very important. And that's why I indicated early on that we've reached a point where you're not only looking at bottom up, but you want to look at the middle up, middle down, so that there is a section where everybody interacts. And that is where you co-design, you co-create, and think about the human-centeredness of whatever you design. Because these days, technology is not only about the apps that we do, it's about the tools that we use, it's about even the wheelchairs, wayfinding, how people navigate spaces, and all these digital tools are used in these spaces. So we should not forget the humanness in all of these things. And remember that everybody matters. And again, in the spirit of Ubuntu, let's work together and enhance the lives of persons with abilities. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'd like to say a very big thank you to my abled panelists. I really enjoyed myself and learned a lot, and I hope you did too. I'd love to have the same panel next time. Okay, so thank you for this session.
Hello. Thank you so much for this wonderful session. I hope we got some takeaways home, not just the food, but ideas and some points to go home with. Please, the conversation is still going on. We are wrapping up for today's session. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's a 2-day event. So we are not just ending here. We are taking it home and hoping that tomorrow we would come back and do more. You can follow us on Twitter as well at ISOC Ghana, at Paradigm HQ. And so they will project it on the board. But please, we have a special gift for the person who is able to drive the agenda on Twitter. So please make sure you make this popular. I want us to trend. If you're able to trend, we have people monitoring and we have so many goodies for you. I mean, I'm not just saying it. The things are there, yeah. So please make sure you tag us in every comment, or you tag all those things in there, take pictures and put out there. We are going to move into our lunch. All speakers should kindly wait behind when we close. So if you were a speaker on any of the panels, just relax yourself here. We'll be back. We are going to have the lunch at the restaurant, so I'll be sharing the coupon very soon. Yes, ma'am. Oh, I think you are right. Yeah, I know. It's time to think about. We are talking about inclusion, and yeah, we didn't include. I'm so sorry about.